Hello everyone, this is Jeff Scott of Blackhawk Technical College. I'm going to be taping the last part of the lecture for Chapter 5 on rotation and adaptive layout. In class when I taped it, for some reason the sound just isn't there. Alright, I don't know exactly what happened. And the one that I was doing offline, I wasn't finished with it. In fact, I kind of balled the project up, for lack of better words. I had this, but there's probably more wrong with this than there is right. I went and took some liberties and was in a hurry and did a few things, so I'm just literally going to do a file, close project, and I'm going to create a new project. So I'm kind of starting up again on page 153 on the creating adaptive layouts. All right, as the author mentioned here, the last example that we did looks fine. But part of the reason is because it's a simple example. And as mentioned in here, sometimes when you work on different, as your project gets a little bit more complex, sometimes it's very hard to make it look good on both an iPhone and an iPad in both orientations. So what they want us to do here, starting on the bottom of page 153, is to create this restructure application. All right. And when we do that, when we start off, it's going to look like this. There'll be an image view, I believe this is, that they call green view, that takes up about 3/4 of the screen, and then 4 buttons on the bottom that really don't do anything. All right, so we'll do that first. And I'm just going to, again, follow the steps that are in here. So with Xcode running, I'm going to start a new Xcode project. They wanted you to call this restructure and have it be a single view. I've already got a restructure, so I'm going to call this restructure 2. And let's bring up the storyboard, and I'm going to jump back then into here. So select the storyboard to start editing the GUI. Since we really don't have an interesting content view we want to display, we'll just use a large colored rectangle. So they want us to draw a single UI view, all right, and they want it to fill up about 3/4 of the screen and a small margin above it and on the sides, as will be shown on the next page, and they're going to call it green view. So what they want us to create is this. Okay, so as I jump back into here, remember that when you create this, by default it takes up as much of the screen just about as it can. We don't want that. I think this will work out much better if I come in right away and change this to green, as they have in the book. Okay. All right, now again, we want there to be a small margin at the top, little margin on each side, so that looks pretty good right now. I'm going to move that up just a tad, and then they want us to, in fact, one thing that we can do is we can change the name of this to green view. Okay, so there's that. And haven't done very much more yet, so let me throw these 4 buttons on as we're told to do. Again, I'm just following the steps as they're shown in the book. And we are told to call these buttons, or put the text on there, Action 1. And I'll go back and fix these as far as how they're lined up, etc. in just a second. Action 2. Action 3. And, oops. and Action 4. Alright, that done. Let's straighten these out again. That one looks okay. Let's put it down just a tad. There we go. Okay. Now, as far as I could tell, they kind of look the way that they're supposed to look, pretty much the same way that it looks on your screen here on page 165. Okay, again, it's not perfect, but it's getting there, for lack of better words. So they told us to drag the buttons out, change the titles to Action 1, Action 2, Action 3, and Action 4. I did all that. So finally, drag the lower edge down until it's a little way above the top row of buttons. Use the guidelines. So again, make it look like this. That's pretty much what I've done. So I'm on the bottom of page 155. It says now let's set up the auto layout constraints. Start by selecting the green view. And I was going to work with my hard copy, and unfortunately I have hard copies of chapters 3, 4, 7, 6, 7, 8, and 9, but not chapter 5, so that's fine. So start by selecting the green view. We're going to pin this to the top and to the left and right sides of the main view. There, I found it. So again, I'm going to go back and forth between this and your actual code. All right. So it says start by selecting the green view. We're going to pin this to the top and left and right sides of the main view. That's still not enough to fully constrain it. We're going to have to fix that by anchoring it to the top of the buttons. So click the pin button at the bottom of the right storyboard. At the top, you see the familiar group of 4 input fields. Leave the constrained to margin checkbox checked and click the red dashed lines above, to the left, and to the right of the small square to attach the view to the top, left, and right sides. Grabbed the wrong one. I wanted the pin one, which is there. All right. Click Add 3 Constraints. Okay, so that's done. Now hold down the Shift key and select the Action 1 and Action 2 buttons. Click the Align button. Check horizontal centers in the pop-up. Then click the Add 1 constraint. This fixes these 2 buttons in a column. Repeat it for the Action 3 and the Action 4 buttons. Alright, so we have now done everything as is shown on page 155 in the book. Alright, select the Action 2 button again and open the pin pop-up. With constrain the margins checked, select the 3 dashed lines to the left, above, and below the square. To the left, above, and below the square. And then click Add 3 Constraints. These constraints fix this button to the lower left corner of the main view and sets the vertical distance between it and the Action 1 button. The positions are now fully specified. Now do something similar with the other set of buttons. So select the Action 4, open up the pin, and this time we want to select the dashed lines above, below, and to the right. and click Add 3 Constraints. Okay, hopefully that's done now. All that's left is to fix the position of the bottom of the green view relative to the buttons. To do that, Control drag from the green view to the Action 1 button. In the pop-up, select Vertical Spacing. That's all the constraints we need. If there are any warnings in the activity view, select it and choose Editor, Resolve Auto Layout Issues. Let's just do that. Editor, Resolve Auto Layout Issues. All fuse. Let's just update the frames. Hopefully that fixed everything. Build and run the application in an iPhone simulator. Well, I've got an iPhone 6. Let's change it. Let's try something different for a change. We'll try an iPhone 4S. All right, we'll do a file save. And let's run this. If everything works as it's supposed to, hopefully what we'll see now is it'll look similar to what you see here on page 156. I just went through those steps and it should look similar to this. And they mentioned it doesn't look too bad. The green view resized properly and you can see all of the views. This arrangement might work, but we can do better. There's a lot of white space around the bottom of the buttons, and the long thin green view might not look good if this was an image view. And they said, how about an iPad? Try it out for yourself. Well, let's go back to here. And as you've seen happen several times with me before, I have to, first time I run the simulator in the morning, quite often I have to come in and quit it and start it up again. Yeah, unable to run app, yeah, whatever. So let's try to run it again. Again, it's now about 7:55, and students will start coming in here in a while. But it's a Thursday, so it'll be all of you who hopefully are watching this. And I'll go until it gets too loud. You know, people come in here and it's too hard to work or whatever. Or until I get too screwed up. And last time that happened around, oh, I don't know, somewhere around page 164, so about the last 8 or 9 pages. All right, this looks pretty good as far as I can tell. Let's rotate it. Still looks pretty good. All right, and they say let's try it again. So let's stop the simulator and let's change this to an iPad. About an iPad 2. We'll run it again. And ideally, again, it'll look similar to what you see in the book on page 157, or right here, where the buttons are here, here, etc. And that pretty much is how it looks. Hardware, rotate. Again, doesn't look bad at all, really. Okay. Let's quit the simulator and we'll go back. Again, it's mentioned on the bottom of page 157, or what you can see on your screen right here. The author says, once again, the layouts adapt well, but we have a problem with extra white space between the buttons. All right. Says this is a perfect example of a layout that needs to be modified for different screen sizes and therefore different orientations. We're actually going to create 2 extra variants of this layout, one that we'll use for the iPhone in landscape and the other for the iPad. It says in case you want to see what we're aiming for, It's shown here on page 158. So that'll be the iPhone in landscape view, and this will be the way that we want it to look on the iPad. So in other words, we'll have the buttons 1, 2, 3, and 4 as opposed to the way they look right now. So to create these two different layouts, we need two more sets of constraints. We can do that while using only one storyboard thanks to a new feature in iOS called size classes. Seems like a good time to, oh, maybe I don't have to say, oh, I'm go back to my project and do a file save. Okay. All right. Take a look at the bottom of the storyboard editor. In the toolbar, you'll see a control we haven't mentioned so far. It's the size classes control, and it's the one labeled WNEHNE. Click this control, and as it says, a pop-up comes up on the screen, as you can see. It's also shown in figure 519 in your book. We'll be using this control to help us create our two extra sets of constraints, but first we need to explain exactly what size classes are all about. All right, now one thing I'm going to try to do, and again try, is I made copies for everybody today. So today, which is the 19th, I'm going to pass out to everyone who's in class that beginning adaptive layout tutorial that I mentioned the other day, which was from the Ray Wanderlich brand of tutorials, and it was on this mobile web weather app. I'd like to go and try to create that and do a tape on that, but we'll see how that works and if I have time. So page 159. This is again the same view that you see right here when I click this. Okay. And as you can see, I can manipulate that around. So, as the author mentions here on the bottom of page 159, the cells in the grid correspond to different horizontal and vertical or width and height size classes. The author defines here a size class as a loose classifications of the width or the height of a device. There's two concrete classes, compact and regular, used to describe real devices, and any, which is mainly, as it says there, can be used as a wild card, which matches either the compact or the regular. So the four different possible combinations of concrete, horizontal, and vertical are shown here. And they're what you'd expect. Compact, compact, regular, regular, compact, regular, and regular, compact. And if you look, it says here compact, compact is for all iPhones except for the iPhone 6 Plus in landscape. Compact, regular is all iPhones in portrait. Regular compact is iPhone 6 Plus in landscape. And regular, regular is all iPads for both landscape and regular format. So in general, the author mentions here on the top of the page, and I don't want to read this to you, but we've talked about this before, and I showed you this in class the other day, and it's not rocket science, that when you're in portrait mode, all right, your height is taller than the width. So as it says there, you've got a compact width and a regular height. When you rotate the landscape, it's reverse. All right? It says the glass size of both is compact. The exception to this, again, is that larger iPhone Plus, which has a regular width and a compact height. As it says, this illustrates you need to consider both size classes when making layout decisions. Okay? iPads, as mentioned, have regular width and regular height in both landscape and portrait. So figure 520 on page 161 shows this kind of graphical picture of what the author was trying to show of the different class size combinations. All right? So, as mentioned here on the bottom of page 161, It says, let's return to the restructure application. Look again at the size control. By default, it's set to WNE/HNE, which means that design applies to devices of any width and any height, which is typically referred to as the base design. And as I mentioned to you in class, that's the one we should always start out by creating the base design first, and once you do that, you can derive any other designs based off of that one. As mentioned here on the bottom of the page, you can modify the design to suit a particular combination of size classes without affecting the base design. All right. That's hopefully at least what we're going to be doing next. So here on 162, the first thing the author mentions at the top of the page, it says the first question to ask is what size combination or combinations correspond to the layout that we're about to design. For all iPhones, it says there, apart from the iPhone 6 Plus, that would be compact width, compact height, which translates to W compact, H compact. That should make sense. All right. However, we want to use the same design for the iPhone 6 Plus, which maps to W regular, H compact. Instead, putting those two together, we need to implement a design that works for any width and compact height. And you do that by setting the pseudo-class any for the width, which it already is, W any. So it says click the size classes control to open up the pop-up, then move your mouse over the squares. As you do so, the blue rectangle changes shape and the description changes to indicate the corresponding combination. We need to select W any H compact, which corresponds to the leftmost two squares on the top, as shown in figure 521. The description at the bottom of the page confirms that we have the correct selection. So I'm going to click down here and have, ideally at least, those first two chosen. All right, and it should say, as it says there, for all compact height layouts, example, iPhones in landscape. To actually make the selection, click the rightmost blue square in your grid. As mentioned here, you'll see that the size class control updates and the toolbar changes color. It was clear before, transparent, it's blue now. This indicates that you're no longer editing the base design. The shape of the view controller in the storyboard also has changed here. It looks more like an iPhone in landscape mode as shown on your screen here, and is also shown in your book on page 163. They pretty much mimic one another because they are the same thing. And there's the blue that we already have seen. So, as mentioned here on the bottom of page 163, there are three things that you can do to modify the design for any given combination of size classes. The changes you make apply only to devices and orientations that map to the current combination that you're working with. First, as mentioned there in the bulletized list, you can add, remove, or modify constraints. Second, you can add or remove views. Third, you can change the font of some of your UI kit controls. In iOS 8, as mentioned there, the label, text field, text view, and the button support this. So, the design that we're working with is so different from the base design that we'll need to remove all of the existing constraints, since all of the views need to change position. Before we make any changes with the storyboard selected, open the Assistant Editor and select Preview in the jump bar. Now, I've had nothing but problems trying to do this, so please watch what I'm doing, and if somebody sees something I'm doing wrong, let me know, and I'm glad to change. This technically up here is what they refer to as your jump bar. But if I click on here, and I go down to Preview, and I say Main Storyboard, nothing happens. Even if I open up, as they mention here, they talk about opening up the Assistant Editor, and the same thing seems to happen as far as I can tell. So again, if I come back in here, Preview, Main Storyboard. Close a couple of these. All right, So as far as I can tell, I don't see it on here. Close this too for right now. Okay, unless this is the preview mode right here, I don't know. But I don't think it is. It says we'll use the preview to make sure that the changes we are about to make don't affect the base design. All right, up to page 164. This is about where I'd left off last time. But I wanted to go back and redo this because it's very hard for me after I did this probably just about a week ago at home to come back and just be able to jump right back into it and remember exactly where I was, etc. So, page 164 in your book. It says, let's start making changes. In the storyboard, resize the green view so that it's positioned on the left side of the main view. All right, leaving room for the 4 columns of buttons that we're about to put in here on the right. Okay, so let's take a look at that. A while back, I did something where I kind of changed the way that this cursor works. It's thicker, it's chunkier, and I've had nothing but problems. And when I've tried to change it back, I guess I should just look it up online to see what I did in order to screw that up, because whatever I did, I made it worse and not better. All right, so I've moved that, very similar to what they show in the book. In fact, in the book, let's see, it says 143, and I have, looks like 121. Next, we need to move the buttons into place. As we stand right now, you might find that difficult to drag the buttons on the left because they're covered by the green view. They're not, but I'm going to drag that down in just a minute. All right. So they're saying don't worry real much about where you put these because we're going to end up kind of moving them around anyway. So I'll just throw this one here. How about that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then drag this down. That's about right. Okay. If something goes wrong, don't attempt to fix it by making more changes. Instead, use your Control-Z, or not Control, your Command-Z, to undo as many steps as you need to do. Okay? All right. So, again, the way we want this to look is in the way that it's shown pretty much in your book on page 158 on the top of the page. Let's go back and review that one more time. So we want it to look like this. Okay, I'm going to try to fix that a little bit. So hopefully it looks a little bit more like that than it does right now. So. this looking a little bit more the way that it looks in the book, but it's not perfect, but it's starting to take shape a little bit. All right. Currently, the green view and the buttons all have constraints that link them to each other and to the sides of the main view. We need to replace all of these constraints with new ones. You might be tempted to do this by selecting them in the document outline and just clicking delete, but that would be a mistake. Deleting constraints removes them from the design for all classes, but we just want to instead do what's called uninstall them for the size class combinations that we'll be editing. So we're told first to select the action button 1 right here. And then open up, in fact, I don't need this anymore, I don't believe. All right. Okay, so we're told to open up the size inspector. It says you'll find 3 constraints that currently apply to this button. Align center, top space, and button space. Looks good. It says double-click the top constraint to show the details. And that's also shown in your book right here. All right. At the bottom, you'll see an installed checkbox that's currently checked right there. We need to uninstall the constraint for this design. To do that, you press the plus button to the left of the checkbox. And select any width, compact height in the pop-up that appears. Any width, compact height. Okay? This adds a new checkbox that applies to the WNEH compact. Clear this checkbox to uninstall the constraint for this combination of size classes while leaving it installed for the base design as shown on the left. So WNEHC, and we want that unchecked. Page 166 here, the author mentions back in the storyboard, you'll notice that the constraint disappears and it's also grayed out in the document outline. Saying someplace in here it's going to be grayed out. All right. Repeat this procedure for all of the constraints attached to the 4 buttons and to the green view. All right, so I'm going to again click on here. And they say also do this for the green view. says you can check you've cleared out all the constraints by selecting each button and checking that they're all grayed out in the size inspector. It says now let's add the constraints that we need for the new design, starting with the green view. All right, we need to pin this view to the top, left, right, and bottom edges of the main view. To do that, select the green view in the document outline. And click the pin button. In the pop-up menu, uncheck the constrain to margins, and then click the dashed red lines above, below, and to the left of the square, but not to the right. Above, below, and to the left of the square, but not to the right. In the input fields above and to the left of the square, above, below, and to the left, enter 20. And click the Add 3 Constraints. So it should look pretty similar, and it does, to what you see in the book on the middle of page 166. And I'm clicking the Add 3 Constraints. Okay? To fix the right side, Control-drag from its center to the right until the main view's background turns blue. I think I have to do it a little further than that, so. All right. Release the mouse button and click the trailing space to container margin. Next, we need to arrange the 4 buttons in a column and drag them into roughly the layout that we need. Refer back to figure 518 as necessary. At this point, we can't make the buttons line up exactly in the storyboard because we don't have all the constraints that we need, so continue to ignore the auto layout warnings for now. Your layout should look similar to what's shown on figure 527 in the book. So the layout that you see right here should look similar to the layout that you see right here. All right, and again, although it's not perfect, it's getting there. All right. As mentioned here, so I'm on page 167 in the text. Okay, we now need to position the buttons vertically and horizontally. We'd like the buttons to be horizontally centered in their column and to be equally spaced vertically. There's no easy way to do this by applying constraints to the button using Interface Builder, since there's no way to say something like make this vertical gap between the 2 buttons the same height as the gaps between the other buttons, which is really what we need. However, we can constrain the views to be of equal height, and that gives us a way to get what we need. We're going to add hidden filler views in the gaps between the buttons and force these hidden views to take up all of the available space and be of equal heights. That's the same as making the gaps all the same size. We can use these same hidden views to center the buttons horizontally as well. We'll make the hidden views occupy all of the horizontal space in the button column and make their centers and the centers of the buttons align along the same vertical line. It says if you don't have the plan clear in your mind, take a sneak peek ahead at figure 528, which is on the next page. Okay, so that's what we're going to attempt to do right now. It says, let's get started. I suggest that you make a copy of your project so at this point so you can revert it to it if things don't work out. So let's do this. do a file save. And then I'm going to take this and minimize it and minimize this. And I've got, there's restructure. That was the original one. There's restructure 2. Command C, Command V. All right, so there's my restructure 2, 2. So I'm just going to rename that to restructure 2, copy. All right, and okay, still have the regular restructure 2 up here. So it says, let's get started. I suggest you make a copy so you can revert to it if things don't work out. Although what we're doing is quite simple, there are a lot of steps and it's easy to go wrong. Let's first create the filler views. Grab a UI view from the object library. All right. And drop it on top of the green view. Resize it so that it's small enough to fit into the gaps between the buttons, both horizontally and vertically. Its height should be no more than 10 pixels. Oh, is it going to let me make this smaller? It is not. There, I just want to remove that. I want to add it again. So. I think I'm not grabbing the view itself. I think that's why I'm having these problems. No, it just doesn't like what I'm trying to do here. I've got to find a way to grab this view that I just added. Let's call this button view. All right. And we have to find a way to make this smaller. So let's see. What if I change the width and height here to 15 by 15? Okay, there it is. That's pretty good. Its height should be no more than 10 pixels. Okay. So there it is right here. Use the Attributes Inspector to give it a gray background so that we can see it more easily. Okay, it's now light gray. Now drag and resize this view so that it fits between the top of the Action 1 button and the bottom of the status bar. As shown to the left in Figure 5.28. Drag and resize it so it fits between the top of the Action 1 button and the bottom of the status bar, as shown on the left on figure 528. Make sure that the top of this view is below the top of the green view, and that the bottom is above the top of the Action 1. There must be no overlap at all. Select the Action 1 button so that you can see its outline to make sure of this. Another way to check is to make the bounds rectangles of every view visible by selecting Editor Canvas Show Bounds Rectangles. It's already turned on. Okay. The setting is a toggle, so select it again to turn it off once you've finished. With this view selected, hold down on the Option key and drag to put another one of these between the Action 1 and 2 buttons, again with no overlap, and then another one between Action 2 and Action 3, and then between Action 3 and Action 4, and between Action 4 and the bottom. So. So this is far from looking great, but it's looking more the way that it's supposed to look, as is shown here on page 168 in the book on the top of the page. So what I'm trying to do is what's shown right here. Okay. Now the author mentions here, it says the filler views that you just added will appear only in the iPhone in landscape mode because we added them with the WNEH compact combination. Select all of the filler views, so select all of them. And click the pin menu. In the pop-up that appears, select equal widths, equal heights. Come on. Then click the Add 8 Constraints. These fillers will now be the same height and width at runtime. Next, let's make the fillers occupy all of the available horizontal space. We only need to make one of them do that, since all the others are constrained to be the same width. So select the top filter view and click the pin button. In the pop-up, click the dashed red lines to the left and right of the square. Enter 0 in the left and the right input fields. And click Add to Constraints. These constraints force the filler view to link to the green view on its left and to the right margin of the main view on its right, thereby spanning the entire column. We also need to align the centers of the filler views and the buttons in one vertical line. That's easy to do. Select all of the filler views and all of the buttons. So we've got that filler views there, and select all of the buttons. So I'm holding down on the shift. Press the Align button. Check horizontal centers. And add constraints. We're almost done. The final step is to make sure that the filler views take up all this vertical space between the buttons and between the top and bottom buttons and the main view. We can do that by forcing the vertical spacing between each pair of these views to be 0. Select all of the filler views. So we want to deselect the button, so to me it's just easier to do it like this. And then click the Pin button. In the pop-up that appears, clear the Constrain the Margins checkbox. Check the red dash lines above and below the square. Enter 0 in the input fields above and below the square. And click Add 10 Constraints. Now we can finally see the results of all this work. In the document outline, click the View controller and then choose Editor, Resolve Auto Layout Issues, Update Frames. All right. You should see the result similar to what's shown in Figure 529. Well, as you can see, mine definitely doesn't look like what's shown in 529. If you don't get the correct result, revert to the save copy and try it again. No, thank you. You'll see that the filler views overlap vertically. If you see they overlap vertically, you probably haven't separated them from the buttons. Well, this all looks okay, but for some reason my Action 3 button just looks totally out of whack here. To finish this layout, select each of the filler views and in turn and check the hidden property in the Attributes Inspector. And then run the example in the iPhone simulator to verify that this result is correct in both landscape and portrait modes. Now, this is probably not going to look correct because of the way it looks right here. I'm going to first come up and do an editor, resolve auto layout issues, update frames. Okay, and I'm going to do a file save, and I'm going to do a run. Now this isn't going to look perfect, and like I said, if this Action 4 button now, it's pushed down, if that looks really out of whack, I'm just going to leave it the way it is. And again, remember, the only time, this should look exactly the same as it did before, because the only constraints we made were for the iPhone 6 in landscape mode. So let's double check that first, and let's see what it looks like right now. And I'll come back and do the last couple pages. I'm up to page 170 in here right now. Alright, I've got the iPad 2, so there you can see it. And if I rotate, okay, boom. Alright, well, that's the one we're going to change in a minute. So I'm going to go to the simulator, and I'm going to quit the simulator. I'm going to come back in here, and I'm going to change it from an iPad 2 to an iPhone 6 Plus. Save. Back to a 6 Plus. Let's get back to our storyboard. It's now a 6 Plus, so let's run this again. Oops. Like I said, it might not look very good, but I'm just sticking with what I've got here. And I'm up to page 170, and I just want to see how long the chapter goes here. Through 173, so I've got about 3 or 4 more pages to go, and then I'm going to put this one to rest, thankfully. This is the 6 Plus. All right. Well, you can see that sure doesn't look the way that it's supposed to look. All right. Oh, well. Sometimes I think in my zeal, quest, or whatever to get done with this, I go through the stuff faster than I should, even though I don't feel like when I'm doing it that I'm going through it quickly. But maybe I am anyway. All right, I'm going to stop the run here. And I'm going to close the project. And then take my restructure to copy. And I'm going to rename that restructure to original. Now I'm going to copy that. And this restructure one here, I'm going to rename that restructure iPhone 6 Plus Landscape. Big name, but that's fine. And this one, I'm going to rename restructure to iPad. That's the one I'm going to open up. So this is before we added those fillers and anything else in there. So to add the iPad layout to the storyboard, we need to switch the editor to the correct combination of size classes. So again, click the size classes control. This is not the original. I can tell by looking at it because that's been changed. Let's close the project. Now I'm going to remove that one. Let me bring up this restructure 2 and see what this is. It's not it either. Restructure 2. Starting to get a whole bunch of mess here, as you can see. Alright, that says it's the original. There's the iPhone Plus with landscape. There's a restructure 2, but I think it's the wrong one. Someplace I thought I had the original one that was just called restructure, but of course I can't see that one now. See, what I wanted was for these to be back over here where they had been before. I'm just going to work with this one so I can finish up here. All right. Oh, I don't want to work with that one though because this has already been reset. I don't want to be jacking with that one. I'm going to stop right now and I'll pick it up in just a couple minutes. Tape is getting way too long.